Oftentimes when you look at science fiction, especially science fiction of the past, space was always basically just a star field in the background, whether it was just a map painting outside a window or, a CGI kind of star field that moved in the background, and that was all you really had to reference that you were in space. Now that has since gotten better. I would say that some of the big game changers were Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, Star Trek 1 also, but that was technically a field that was surrounding an object, in case you haven't seen that movie, which kind of blows my mind if you haven't, but especially Wrath of Khan. When they have their battle in the Mutara Nebula at the end of that movie, it was one of those moments where all of a sudden space ceased to be that little weird star field that you knew was there, but it didn't really hold a lot of significance. And all of a sudden space became kind of like a place with varying environments and varying terrains within it. And also it kind of highlighted the tactical possibilities that something like that brings to the fore. They were entering into an environment where their sensors would not work and where their shields wouldn't work. And so, not to give too much of the plot away, if you haven't seen the movie, which by the way is an utter cinema sin, but if you haven't seen it, they're at a disadvantage. They're having to face an enemy who is more powerful than they are, who is in a better situation than they are, and they use this universal negative situation, this ambient field around the nebula or within the nebula that prevents the use of sensors and shields to kind of even the odds with their enemy, and they use superior tactics and experience to defeat an enemy who has them more or less outgunned. And it's fantastic, and I would love to just make a review just about that movie, but we're not here for that. Star Citizen recently added something to the space environments that we travel within, and that is the idea that these gas clouds, that these areas that can be different within even the confines of a solar system can exist within the game. We knew that these things were coming, but now they're here and we can travel within them. Now, we always knew that these things were coming. We knew that these things were going to be a part of Star Citizen. To what extent, we weren't exactly all that sure until roughly about a year ago when we first saw the Pyro system. Now, of course, when we first saw the Pyro system, of course, that was having to deal with the Carrack for the most part. The Carrack was the star of the show for most people out there. And so they were like, oh, Gib, Gib Carrack and all that stuff. But what I took away from that is when I finally saw the Pyro system, even though we only saw it for a few seconds, I looked at it and just said, that's it. That's home. That's perfect. That is amazing. Now, the first kind of kick at the can that we've gotten here in Stanton is fairly visually impressive. However, having shown that image now of Pyro, I think we can all agree that Pyro was by far more impressive. But as a tier 0 implementation of that system, of bringing it to life in the game, this is totally fine. And I have zero complaints about it. I have suggestions. Of course I do. I would like to see it be much bigger. I would like to see these kind of gas clouds that are kind of winding around within the solar system. I would like to see them extend all across the solar system and not just be limited to, like, what is this, Hurston L2, I believe that I'm at the moment. I would like to see this actually extend across the entire solar system. So as you're quantuming through the system, you would also kind of get the sense, like, the quantum effect that we have right now, I'm not a huge fan of. That's for a number of reasons, but visually, I just don't like all this stuff kind of dashing around your ship and all these really weird looking particle effects coming off the wingtips, which totally look out of place in my opinion. I would like to see it kind of dialed back almost to something similar to what we had in the very first iterations of the persistent universe back in 2.0. And I would actually like the idea that we're traveling through the star system to be delivered to us as we're moving through this large kind of three-dimensional gas field that exists within the solar system. I would like that to be our indicator of movement rather than just like these little flashes of light floating past our ship. That's my taste. That's my opinion. Now, other solar systems could be, different colors, different compositions, different levels of thickness, or just presence, I guess would be a good way to put it. Don't really have the vocabulary for that. But as a first iteration, I love it. I just wish it was bigger and it was, it actually extended across the entire solar system. I think that would be a far better way to kind of give the impression of being out in space with various kind of like tendrils of gas or various little gas pockets in certain areas being so dense that maybe it has an impact on your sensors, or maybe it has an impact on your shields, or both, or maybe there's static discharges in certain regions that you have to watch out for. Things like that would be really cool. I mean, here we are traveling through a group of asteroids. This would be a great place that, when we do these missions where it's like raid the bunker and steal the drugs, or raid the bunker and, get rid of the pirates, those types of missions. I would like those missions to be actually based on abandoned outposts out in regions of space like this, where, it kind of gives you a vague area and then you have to kind of go and look for it and try to track it down using sensors and things like that. And maybe in certain areas the sensors don't work that well, so it's really on the player and the skill level to kind of track these objectives down. To a certain degree, that's one of the big things that kind of, in the beginning it was kind of a convenience in games like WoW, when it would just kind of say like, oh, the quest, your objective's right here, like here are the exact coordinates, go kill this guy, boom, you're done the quest. It's convenient, but at the same time it kind of takes away from the wonder of exploration, which hopefully this is going to be something that as they iterate it in Star Citizen, it's going to be something that only adds to the gameplay and adds to the immersion, which is, I think that in terms of player convenience, games like WoW have kind of gone a little too far, and I think that they need to rein that back. But it's a much more layered proposal that I would argue for, and that we're not going to be kind of getting into WoW's quest system here, but I think that especially when I was traveling through this part of the cloud, and I was just like, this is good. This is really, really good. And we need more of this, especially just in certain areas of the solar system. It should just be utterly like this, like very, very much obscuring what you can see, not just in terms of, visually, but also in terms of sensors and things like that. So maybe there is something just over there, but you can't see it. Maybe there could be an entire Polaris or a cargo ship just 2-3 kilometers away from you, but you won't see it unless the lighting is just right, or unless they ignite their engines and you see the flash or something like that. This is what I hope that we're going to get a lot more of in Star Citizen. And the Pyro preview that they showed us was fairly promising. When the topic of base building comes up and people talk about, oh, I'm going to build a base on a planet, and someone says, oh, don't do that, that's stupid, someone's just going to come along and blow it up. But if you think about it, regions like this that are thousands or hundreds of thousands of kilometers long, that have many, many different sizes of asteroids, and you have just these limited gameplay areas. I mean, when we talk about the planets, we talk about how huge they actually are and the amount of gameplay area that they've developed. But just something simple like this, extended over hundreds of thousands of kilometers, it makes the possibilities for base building, resource exploration, all that stuff, it makes it infinite, or virtually infinite, as close to infinite as we would ever really need. And so when people say, oh, your stuff's just going to get blown up, yeah, well, they got to kind of find it first. And, that's the one thing that a lot of people don't get, is it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. And space is really, really big. It's a big old place. And so, finding a needle in the haystack, especially in an environment like this, could be a very difficult proposition. And this is kind of the environments that I would love to see developed further. The potential tactical impact of regions like this within Star Citizen, I think, is also just, I mean, the potential for enriching gameplay could be enormous. If you think about limiting sensors or the functionality of shields or creating certain environmental effects that could be detrimental to ships, it really does kind of play into that Battle of the Mutara Nebula fantasy, that Star Trek II kind of fantasy, where a ship that is outgunned and damaged can lure another ship into a nebula and potentially defeat them, even if they're totally outgunned, just by knowing the environment and understanding how to use that to your advantage. That sort of thing. I think you would find that there's a lot of people in the Star Citizen community who are just like chomping at the bit for that type of tactical environment to actually play out their battles within. I think that's also one of the things that when people go and they compare ships and they say, well, this ship's going to be this ship in combat, 9 times out of 10. When you add environments like this, when you add these types of complications or these types of parameters that people maybe are not always thinking of, you can upend a lot of those equations. Like this beats that 9 times out of 10. Well, what happens if he can't see the other guy coming? What if this person actually is able to get at a certain point where they can bring their turrets to bear and the other guy can? They say, oh yeah, well, I'd spot you a mile away and I'd shoot you with my railgun. My Idris is supreme. But what happens if they can't actually see you coming and you can actually get that positional advantage? When we're talking about bigger ships and the speeds that they can move through space, yeah, it does have a huge impact on fighters, but what if they can't see the fighters coming in? What if the fighters know where they are, but they don't know where the fighters are? And this is something that could, really kind of upend a lot of these things and potentially not solve these problems, but at least alter the equation enough to make things interesting again from a certain point of view. And also, being able to hide a little landing site floating around on an asteroid where you can refuel your ships or swap cargoes or things like that, I think that would appeal to a lot of players. I think that if CIG were to add maybe like derelict mining stations or derelict, signal stations out in space that players could actually purchase from the UEE, like, oh, we abandoned that site years ago. Anybody who wants to use it and make something out of it, yeah, we'll sell it to you for X amount of UEC. I think you would find a booming market within players to actually purchase these locations or purchase access or just, the knowledge of where these locations are. And you would find that there's a lot of players who kind of look for the exploring career in Star Citizen and who have been left kind of a little bit emotionally flat by the fact that, well, everything's a nav point and you travel to the nav point. But regions like this, especially vast regions like this, where players can actually just get in their ship and scan around and explore, I think that this would go a long way to fulfilling that exploration fantasy. Now, as far as I know, the base building stuff set aside, because that is a lot of unanswered questions right now with CIG, though I would encourage them to kind of go in that direction. But as far as we know, that environments like this are eventually going to have an impact. I think that was kind of delivered when we saw the Squadron 42 mission in the vertical slice demo, where they're talking about going into the coil and the hazards within that environment. So it seems that CIG is definitely building broadly into this direction, and they are kind of headed this way. And, this is kind of like when people see my videos and they say, oh, you complain about this, you complain about that. These are the things that I'm hype about. These are the things that I'm very, very excited about. The only real complaints that I had with this kind of tier 0, very first try implementation in the functional, sometimes persistent universe, my only complaint was just like, no, make it bigger. It's perfect, but bigger, and just that was it. This is one of the things about Star Citizen that makes me really hyped for the future. I want to see those tactical impacts or impact on tactical gameplay. I would like to see that become part of the system, sooner rather than later. And I honestly, the only downside to these gas clouds is that they're way too small. Way too small. Like, these gas clouds have got to expand and extend over the entire solar system. And there's got to be areas of varying density. You know, some places you can see the stars through, some places you can't, and some places where it's going to have very serious impacts on your ship, and other areas where it's just going to be business as usual. That's what I would like to see in the future. But for right now, from what we've heard from CIG, they seem to be heading in the right direction with this. And so, you know, as a first implementation, this is something that I definitely wanted to make a video about, because this is something that made me very, very excited. Very, very excited for the future of Star Citizen. Anyways, that's the show for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.